Hello, this is Miss Wilson and welcome to AP Environmental Science. I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing here. This is called a flipped classroom. So what you're going to be doing is taking your notes at home through these videos, which are going to be basically taped lectures of what we would do in class, and then you're going to be taking notes as you do this. So I want you to remember that it's important to be able to stop and pause this video whenever you need to, and then go ahead and play again when you're ready. Please make sure that you take careful notes because this is fair game for any quizzes, any activities the next day, and it will of course show up on your test later on. I will try to limit this to about 15 minutes a night. It shouldn't hopefully take you more than 45 with all of your pausing and taking notes. So let's get started here. This is our first unit and we are going to be talking about sustainability. And this goes along with chapters 1 and 2 in your textbook. We're going to do 4 lectures. The first one today, we're going to start off talking about Earth as a system and sustainability. We're going to move on tomorrow to the growing human, or 2 days from now, to the growing human population and its footprint. Perspectives in economics comes next, then developing solutions to environmental problems. And these will all go along with the class topics that you're going to see the next day in class. There will usually be either a quiz at the beginning of class, or sometimes online ahead of time, or I'll check your notes, or I might even do both. So please be ready for any of that. And then, of course, we will do an activity that's related to the things that we talked about in the notes. So make sure you understand everything. Use that time at the beginning of class to ask questions if there's anything in the notes that you didn't understand. So we're starting off here with chapter 1, which is called Introducing Environmental Science and Sustainability. So we're going to start talking about what this idea of sustainability is and why it's important in our study of environmental science. So first of all, what is environmental science? Well, it's really the science that puts everything together to look at how humans interact with other organisms and also with their environment. So there's a number of sciences that you can see are involved in this. 2 of the big ones are biology, which is of course the study of life, ecology in particular, which is how that life interacts with the environment. So that's really the focus of most of what we're doing here. But it also takes into account geography, which is where you are in the world, chemistry, how the different chemicals are interacting, geology, which is rocks and earth processes like plate tectonics, physics, study of motion and forces, economics, and then we get into a lot more of the sociology and demography, which is the study of people and how they're interacting with each other, and we get into politics a lot here. Because when we're talking about an environment, you're not just talking about the science that makes it work, you also need to talk about how people are going to interact with it and with each other, and who's going to take care of that environment. So when we're talking about our environment, we're going to do it on several different levels. But most of the time we're talking about it from a global perspective, so that would mean we're talking about Earth. Now, Earth is estimated to be between 4.5 and 4.6 billion years old, and life has existed for 3.8 billion of those years. And this really is possible here and not on many other planets for a number of reasons. One, we have water covering 3/4 of our planet, and it turns out that water is really important to sustaining life. We have a really habitable, moderate temperature that a lot of things can survive at, and as well as that we have moderate sunlight, which kind of drives the temperature thing and also provides the power that basically feeds our food chain. Then our atmosphere also has plenty of oxygen. If you remember from biology, you need oxygen in order to do cellular respiration and get energy. It also has carbon dioxide, which does a number of things. One is provide the plants with the raw materials for sugar, but it also helps insulate the planet, and we'll get to stuff like that later. And then of course we have a rich soil, and that's going to give your plants and other things their essential minerals. So when we're talking about the environment, we want to talk about it in terms of systems. And again, you can look at systems on a number of different levels, but we're going to start off with thinking as the whole globe as a system. a set of components that's interacting, functioning together as a whole. And when we start to look at the globe as a system, we can start to see how human activities are affecting that system. So we want Earth systems to be maintained in a state of what we call dynamic equilibrium. So basically what that means is things are staying relatively constant, but they're not never changing. They do change sometimes. So for instance, your weather will pass through, that will change the conditions in a certain area at any given moment, but we want the Earth as a whole system to stay pretty much the same. And that's why you see things like nutrient cycles, so that everything gets cycled around, but it stays pretty much the same even though it's moving. And this happens by something we call feedback. So just like when I give you feedback in the classroom, it's because I want you to change something about the way you're doing, or I want you to keep doing something that you're already doing. So feedback is supposed to lead to a change. And there's two types of feedback that we want to worry about. Negative feedback, which is going to give us a response that's going to change what's happening. So if we're in the classroom and I give you negative feedback, I want you to change something that you're doing in your work. Or positive feedback, which is going to intensify what's happening. So positive feedback in a classroom would be a great job. I want you to keep, listing your sources, doing things like that. When we're talking about the environment, negative feedback, again, is going to counteract the condition. So say it's getting too humid in the air. Water starts to condense and then it falls. That's changing the condition. That humidity is now going to fall as the rain falls down. Positive feedback, on the other hand, is something that's going to increase the condition. So one of the things we talk about with positive feedback is with climate change, as we add more CO2 to the atmosphere, it's getting warmer. As it's getting warmer, it's doing things like melting areas that hold trapped methane in the Arctic, and that methane is then adding more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and it's getting warmer again. So the warming just intensifies. So that would be an example of positive feedback. Now, when we're talking about these systems, we also want to talk about the resources that we're using in these systems. And there are several different types of resources you should know about. First one is called a perpetual resource. So on a human scale, these will never run out, basically. So these are things like solar power, wind energy, tidal energy. In our human lifetimes, we're not going to run out of sun. The sun is going to be there for several billion years probably after we're gone. So that is a perpetual resource. Then we have renewable and non-renewable resources, which are most of the ones that you'll hear about. On a human time scale, the renewable ones can be replenished and the non-renewable ones can't. So if we look at these, the renewable resources would be things like soil, water, air, even biological diversity, things like forests. You could regrow a forest within a human lifetime. Non-renewable resources would be things that take millions of years to produce, or we just can't get on our own. So things like minerals, salts, fossil fuels are our biggest type of non-renewable resource that we want to be focused on. So humans need to be really mindful of using these non-renewable resources because we cannot replicate them in our lifetime. We can't make more. So that brings me to something called carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that the planet can sustain. So carrying capacity is basically how much the ecosystem can hold before it's full, because that's all the resources it has to give. So if we look at this graph, its carrying capacity is right here, this blue line. Don't want you to worry about the years, but say this is a deer population. What might happen is that population might grow past the carrying capacity. If it's doing really well, it starts using up all the resources, and now they've eaten all the young trees and things like that, and they run out of food. So that's called an ecological overshoot. It's when the population goes beyond the resources that the ecosystem can support. And what would happen then is that you'd have a die-off. because it just can't support all of those. So the population would start to die off. Then it might rebound and come back up above the carrying capacity again and die off again, and so on. But it has to stay pretty close to that carrying capacity because that's really all the ecosystem can support. Whenever it goes past that carrying capacity, there are going to be other things that will prevent those animals from surviving. Since there are not enough resources to carry that population, it will start to bring the quality of the resources down, and it will start to lower the population as well. So there's two things that can happen there. Either the population collapses and you see it disappear, and this can lead to extinction sometimes, or they learn to live within that carrying capacity and they learn to use their resources wisely. So we're going to start talking about this with the human population. How close are we to carrying capacity? Are we in an ecological overshoot? And what's going to happen if we are and we keep going? So this brings me to the idea of environmental sustainability. This is the ability to meet our needs for resources without removing those resources for future generations. And this is something we need to worry about because our actions are affecting our environment. And if we affect our resources that are available, they may not be available for future generations because they're not infinite. They do run out. So there are 4 scientific principles of sustainability, and basically they all involve doing things the way that nature does it, making sure that the food chain is based on a reliable source of solar energy, a perpetual resource, maintaining biodiversity, which is going to help the gene pool to overcome different challenges, recycling nutrients so that none gets out of balance, and controlling populations so that they don't start to overwhelm those resources. We're also going to be talking about sustainable development, which by that we mean economic development and also the development of cities and things like that, so that we again meet our needs for this generation and also keep our resources around for future generations. We may also talk about this in terms of sustainable resource harvesting, so how much we can log an area and still have trees left over to reproduce, things like that. And sustainable ecosystems. How do we use these ecosystems so that we get what we call ecosystem services that are helpful to us, while not actually using them up, and again, having them available for future generations. That's what this idea of sustainability is all about, is how do we use our resources without using them up completely? How do we use them in a smart manner that is sustainable, that is something that we can keep going for a long time? So tomorrow in class, one of the things we're going to look at with this idea of sustainability is something called the tragedy of the commons. And this was written by a guy called Garrett Hardin, and I believe it was 1968. And he said that when we're trying to solve environmental problems, you have to struggle between 2 things. Your short-term welfare, so how much money you're going to make, how you're going to provide for your family, all of the things that we worry about on a daily basis about ourselves, and the long-term welfare of the community and of the environment so that it will still be sustainable and support generations to come. So one of the things we're going to do is an activity that kind of looks at how you balance that short-term welfare with your long-term environmental welfare. And this came from a situation that, again, we'll introduce a little bit more tomorrow, but in medieval Europe, they had common pasture land, and they had to basically work out a way to share it without making it so that the pasture was no longer helpful to us. So I hope this has been a good lecture for you. Again, make sure you have good notes, and I will see you tomorrow in class. Bye.